Hello, everyone, and welcome to Think Like a Thought Leader, Up-Leveling Your Personal Brand. My name is Colleen O'Brien, and I lead marketing for M12, which is Microsoft's venture fund. And we are investing in the best B2B software entrepreneurs globally. I'm so excited to have you here today. We're going to run through just a few rules of the road. Number one, we want all of you to be engaging. You'll see the chat box in the right rail of your Remo screen right now. Please be sure to send through any questions you have, cheer on our panelists, let them know you're appreciating their guidance and insights. Cheer, of course, send through any emojis you're feeling. Use that chat box whenever possible. Of course, connect during the social lounge experience with other attendees. Throughout the day, there are going to be numerous networking opportunities. Please do take advantage of those. And share, whether it's learnings from the session today or general enthusiasm for the Women in Cloud mission. Please do get the word out and let others know that you're having a great time at the summit. So I'm going to tell you a little bit more about our panel today. Whether you are a startup founder or an investor or a corporate executive, we all need to be thinking about personal brands. Today's panel is going to explore not only the reasons why, but also the tactical way to build personal brand amplification and maintenance into your schedule. We're also going to be exploring that mystifying term of thought leadership. Each and every one of us has the potential to become a thought leader in our respective industries, but understanding how to engage that mindset can be a little daunting. Our panelists are going to help get you there. This is your opportunity to learn how to leverage your experiences, your passions, your interests, and your expertise to take greater control of your personal brand and ultimately accelerate your business. We have a solid set of questions for our experts, but please do feel free to share your questions in that Q&A box, as I mentioned. So without further ado, I am thrilled to introduce our star panelists. I'm going to have all of them turn their mics on and cameras on as I'm introducing them here. First off, we have Jenna Lang, who is the founder and president of Lang International. Jenna is also an advisor at Ori and the Athena Alliance. Next, we have Renee Bergeron, who is the Senior Vice President and General Manager AppSmart at AppDirect. Next, we have Rocky Lockman, the Head of Marketing at Tribeca Venture Partners. And last, we have Miracle Olatunji, the founder of Opportunity, a startup helping young leaders and professionals navigate their careers in the digital age. And Miracle is also a student at Northeastern University. So welcome, panelists. Thank you so much for being here today. Before we get started, we are going to kick off with some quick vocabulary, just to make sure we are all on the same page. First, Rocky, I'm hoping you can help us out here. What do people mean when they say personal brand?
Great. Well, so first I have to say I'm thrilled that we're kicking off 2021 with a conversation around personal brands. The reality is most of us were not focused on our personal brands in 2020. I think this is a great time for us to really make up for some lost time and have a roadmap in terms of setting us up for success for going forward. So when I think about personal brands, I think about a couple different things. I think one is, for me, your personal brand is what differentiates you from others in the marketplace. So I think about it as your competitive advantage. I also think that there's an opportunity, and I think in this audience, and especially as women and BIPOC professionals, I think there's an opportunity for you to really set yourself up for success by building your personal brand, both offline and online, and unlocking your full potential. So I think throughout this session, really think about how you're going to unlock your full potential, whether it's having a bigger brand and be able to excel professionally, connecting with folks to be on a personal board of advisors. Your personal brand can help you accomplish all those things. So if I break it down to a couple different components, for me, it's comprised of you. So I think all of you are unique and differentiated. So you're setting yourself up for success already. It's about your purpose or your mission. It's about the reasons to believe. And then it's about how do you amplify, the amplification of that. So a more practical example for you, I would think about the 3 to 5 adjectives that describe you. So are you someone are you intelligent? Are you confident? Are you compassionate? Whatever those words are that describes you, that's a part of that you component. I would think about, what's your mission? What's your purpose? What makes you feel alive? If you're someone who is passionate about disrupting the women and girls leadership space, for instance, very very relevant for what we're talking about today, then that's a part of your mission and part of your values. And then what are those reasons to believe that? So maybe you're someone who speaks at conferences, maybe you're on the board of an organization, maybe you're mentoring women and girls. So those are the reasons to believe that. And then finally, the amplification. So are organizations speaking about what you're doing? Are you sharing that across your channels? The women and girls that you mentor, are they also speaking up on your behalf and amplifying that message? Because the reality is you want this personal brand to live even when you're not in the room, so that when people think about you, they know what exactly you stand for.
Fantastic. And Jenna, I think that you can help us out with this next one. Thought leadership, what is it?
And I'm hoping you can hear me okay, because I had a little bit of a lag happening there. Are you hearing me okay? Fantastic. Okay. So thought leadership, I love what you said, Rocky, about purpose. I'm sitting here thinking of purpose, transition into thought leadership, because I get this question a lot. I have been asked to become a thought leader, or I need to be a thought leader before I look for this seat on a board, or I need to do this in my organization. Defining thought leadership, it is when you are an authority or an expert in an area so that people come to you and seek your advice around the topic. Now, when I say that, a lot of times my clients or others will say, wow, well, I'm not an expert, or, oh my gosh, how do I become an expert? There's so many other people that are experts in customer success, or they're experts in helping women get seats on, helping young girls find their power and their voice. Why am I an expert? And a lot of times, I think as a women, as a community, we overthink this idea around being an expert in something. What is an area? So there's a couple questions for you to ponder as you consider your own thought leadership position. What is something that you cannot shut up about? Where you're sitting at a dinner table and the topic comes up and you're like, this is it. This is my space. Just watch over world. I am going to go. And you will not stop talking about that topic. So that's the first question to ask yourself. And then ask yourself the question of, what do others call me for advice on? And this is where it's really interesting, because a lot of the people that I work with, men and women, they recognize that they're getting asked for their advice on a topic that actually isn't what they spend 40 to 80%, 80 hours of their week working on. They're like, well, wait a second. I mean, I'm spending all my time building these amazing operational stacks, but what people are asking me for advice on is, as a woman, how do I advance my career? That's what I'm getting asked for advice on. Okay, well, maybe that's what your thought leadership position should be, and what you should consider doing your research and asking questions around. So what are you an expert in? What do people come to you for advice on? And then what is, coming back to purpose, like, what are you so passionate about that you can't shut up about? Because that's probably coming back to that sense of what your purpose is and for others. And then that helps you define what your purpose is for yourself. So that's how I define thought leadership. But the biggest thing to take away is, let's not make it bigger than it is.
Excellent. I can already hear the wheels turning, the creativity happening in the audience here today. And now that we have these terms defined, I think we're ready to roll. So the process of developing a personal brand or authoring thought leadership might feel a little overwhelming right now for people in the audience. Building and amplifying a personal brand is definitely going to take some time. Why is it worth spending time on this topic? What is at stake if you don't care about your personal brand? Miracle, I would love to hear from you on this topic.
Sure. So I would say definitely in terms of personal branding, one of the biggest things that come out of like having a personal brand is opportunity. It's the fact that visibility leads to opportunity. And if you put yourself out there, you're basically putting yourself out there to new connections and new opportunities and ways to continue to inspire people and inform them about different topics that you're passionate about. So I would say opportunity is something that's at stake if you don't focus on your personal brand.
Great. And Jenna, I know that you coach several clients on this topic. How do you get them to buy in?
To the idea that they need thought leadership?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, here's when it often happens, it's sometimes, I don't want to say it's too late, but a lot of times we're looking at our thought leadership at that moment of a transition, right? Where we're saying, I'm looking for my next path. And that might not be a career switch as much as it's, I want to give back to the world, or I want to be on a board. And that's the moment where they say, how are people going to find me around these ideas that I really want to do something with? Well, if you haven't thought through what stake you want to put in the ground and what your thought leader position is, no one's going to be able to find you. So you want to start looking at, and I have one of these maps in my home where I show the journey of my life, like where I started and where I've gone, and then where I want to go is the dream. And in those places, I'm starting to create moments of I'm an expert here, or I need to spend time there. And these are the thought leadership positions that I want to put into the world, and then talk about it. Tell as many people as you can, amplify what you want, and get your advocates to advocate for you around that thought leadership position. So you don't lose that opportunity when you do want to transition.
Jenna, you're reminding me of an example from my life. I was just about ready to start looking for a new job, and a colleague reached out and said, hey, I've put your name in to be the exec comms lead for this, this new executive. I hope that was okay. And I said, yeah, I really appreciate it. We haven't worked together in years. Like, I'm just curious why you did that. And he said, oh, I've just you've been really active on LinkedIn recently. I've seen you talking about these topics, thought it was top of mind for you. So I will +1 to what both Miracle and Jenna have said here. Opportunities abound when you are building those connections, putting that thought leadership out into the world. Mm-hmm. So one of the first steps in developing thought leadership or personal brand content is to figure out what you're an expert in. Jenna, you alluded to this. And unfortunately, this is a place where a lot of people get stuck. Maybe it's not what they're doing in their 9 to 5. What are some of the actionable ways to determine what you should stand for? Renee, I'd love if you could take this one.
Yeah, I think it can be pretty daunting to figure out your personal brand content. When you're at the onset of your career, it can feel like such a huge decision that could literally influence the rest of your professional career. So I'll tackle it from a tactical perspective. So here's where I would get started. I would start by asking myself, what am I most passionate about? For me, that's the most important question, because if you find a topic that you're passionate about, then establishing yourself as a thought leader will come naturally. So if you find a topic or topics that you're passionate about, you can actually be yourself. You can be genuine. It's probably a topic that you read a lot about because it interests you. And therefore, again, developing thought leadership will come in naturally. Now, if you're not sure what you're passionate about, there's a couple of things you can do. So you can start by doing a self-audit to pinpoint your purpose, look at your strengths, look at your values. But, that can be quite difficult because, let's face it, we have a tendency to second guess our ability, and we may come up with quite a short list. So another trick is to ask others who know you very well. They might come up with answers that were there all along, but that you couldn't see. And if that doesn't work, another trick could be to keep a checklist of everything that you do in a single day. And as you make entries on your checklist, next to each of them, mark what level of energy it gives you, from low, medium, and high. And become the thought leader around the ideas that give you energy. Because where you've marked yourself as high energy is probably something that you've got passion behind.
Oh, love these tactics. self-auditing, jotting down how you're spending your days, what's bringing you energy, that is a new one for me. I've done the 360 feedback tool before, but I appreciate that reflection of a self-audit. Rocky, is there anything that you can add here?
Sure. Well, I think Renee did a great job in terms of covering the different areas of how you workshop. I think the two pieces I would add is one, I think it's a great exercise to do with accountability partners. I think you think about it as when you do a vision board, it's actually more impactful when you're doing a vision board when you're with a group than when you're doing it by yourself, because you're feeding off of each other's energy, and you might spark an idea that sparks an idea for someone else. So I do think there's an opportunity to do this together and to have a collective energy around it. And I think the other place is to realize that this is not an exercise that happens at one point in time. It's an ongoing exercise. So when you start off, there's a phased approach. You can start off and have a few ideas, and you can build it over time. So I think to take off some of the pressure, I believe Jenna alluded to this, just taking off some of the pressure and doing this exercise and diving in, the reality is this is a journey for you. So you're in phase one of the journey, but we'll have phase 2, 3, and 4, and realize that it'll continue to be part of who you are, and it doesn't all have to happen in one sitting, in 1 hour session.
Excellent. A final way that I want to bring up is around pressure testing. So for example, like let's say at the end of the day, you have a list of 5 things that you want to develop content or thought leadership around. Like maybe you test some of those ideas out on the people who are following you on LinkedIn, on Twitter, to see what resonates. Personal experience here, I spent about 4 months in corporate social responsibility on a stretch project and thought I would try my hand. Like, am I doing a corporate philanthropy thing now? Is this what I stand for? And it was so wild to see how that didn't really resonate with my followers. I had already built a marketing and communications career. This new thing was sort of out of left field. There wasn't a lot of transition. And it was really all about authenticity. And what I had built my brand around for years, taking a hard pivot was difficult. So I'd like to talk a little bit more about authenticity. It is inherently linked to your personal brand. Why is authenticity an important pressure test for personal brand pillars? And what is at risk in projecting a personal brand that isn't 100% me? What did I risk in doing a hard pivot into something that wasn't totally aligned with how I was spending my time or what I knew a lot about? Miracle, I would love to hear from you on this one.
Yes, I'm so glad that you brought up authenticity, because I feel like nowadays with social media, it's so easy to feel like you're in this fantasy world where everything is perfect and everything is going well all the time. And I think when we are authentic with our following, whether it's your Instagram followers or your LinkedIn followers, you're able to show other people that like you are relatable. And I think the thing that's interesting and separates a personal brand from like a company brand is the human element behind it. And so I think if you show up as who you are, ups and downs of your journey, I think that could really inspire people, because you never know who might be going through that same challenge in their business or in their personal life. And you sharing that could just open up the door for conversation about those topics that someone might be going through. And I think the risk with not being authentic is just like not being able to have those connections with people.
Absolutely. Putting anything out on social media is a good pressure test for authenticity. Renee, I'd love to get your point of view on this too.
Yeah, I mean, I'll echo Miracle's comments. Authenticity really helps us build deeper connection with others. It helps us build trust. So leaders that are rooted in authenticity create enormous benefit for themselves, for those they lead, and for the organizations overall. And that's true in life or in social media. So how do you build these authentic connection? I think it's about really letting our guards down. You have to step into your authentic self to seek, to see, and understand. And what's interesting is when you do that, there's like countless documentation about the fact that being authentic is good for our health, right? As humans, we seek human connections, and it can bring us joy, happiness, and fulfillment. So, it's absolutely positive. On that topic, I read recently a book that was super interesting. It's called Wired for Authenticity. The writer is Hannah Inam, I-N-A-M. Highly recommend it. And one final comment I would make is that it's important to remember that personal branding is a marathon. It's not a sprint. So it takes sustained energy over time. And I actually think that you asked what's the risk. Well, I actually think that if your personal brand is not based around authenticity, it's going to be impossible to keep up the level of energy over time to be successful in establishing your brand.
Renee, as you said, authenticity is good for your health. I untensed my body. I was like, okay, I'm gonna get a little bit more comfortable here. So thank you for sharing that. And Miracle and Renee, as you've been talking about authenticity here, I was reminded of an individual I follow on Instagram. Her handle is her first 100K. She's a personal finance expert who is living here in Seattle. And she delivers incredible, life-changing financial advice. She also loves Timothée Chalamet. And both of those things show up so equally in her feed. It makes it not only important and helpful to follow her, but also very engaging and entertaining. And I couldn't help but think about some of her content as you were speaking. So we're going to do a little bit of a detour from authenticity, but there's so many threads woven in there. Over the past several months, it seems like there has been a monumental news story on a near weekly basis. Just in this month of January, can you believe that we're still in January? We saw an insurrection, an impeachment, an inauguration, and GameStop's soaring stock just this week here in the US. Many influencers get pressured by their audiences to promote what they stand for at these moments to make their values incredibly clear. They might be moments that they lose a lot of followers or gain some followers. So to continue this topic of authenticity, how should you determine when to speak up and the topics on which you should keep quiet? Miracle, I'd love to hear from you on this one.
Yeah, this is a really good one. And it's crazy to believe that we're still in January and all these things have already happened. Let's see. I think the first example that came to mind was over the summer with the Black Lives Matter protest. And I don't know if you guys remember when people were posting the black squares, and there was a lot of backlash about how, this is really sensitive hashtag, and it was kind of demoting all the other posts that were showing what was going on in real time at the protest. And at the time, I noticed this same situation that you were talking about, Colleen, where people weren't sure about what they should say or if they should say anything at all. I think when it has to do with issues that involve marginalized voices, I think it's really important to think about when you should be speaking up and being an ally, and when you should take a step back and let those people who are being affected by the issue to speak up and share their experiences, and to really listen and to not make assumptions. Because I think that's the biggest issue with communication, is not listening. And I think we need to recognize that communication is a two-way street. It's not just talking, but it's also actively listening and trying to understand other people's perspectives. And you're going to mess up along the way, and that's okay. Which kind of goes back to the point of listening and getting feedback, and just making sure that, what you're posting is not offensive to other people, and being open and receptive to feedback.
Thank you, Miracle. And sometimes people do end up taking that leap and commenting out of turn, maybe when they aren't as educated, maybe when they haven't done as much listening in advance. Let's say that an individual has misjudged when they should speak up, and they've offered a premature, uninformed point of view, and maybe they're now seeing some backlash. And of course, when it comes to social media, backlash is pretty public. So if you've offended members of your audience, what is the crisis management strategy for recovery? Jen, I'd love to hear from you on this one.
Sure. Before I get into that, I just want to say, Miracle, I love what you said about listening and how important that is. And mirroring, like listening to the audiences that you are trying to understand and identify with before you speak up. And then Renee, building on something you said earlier, which is listening to your own, when you say, how does this feel right now? When I'm about to step into a topic that I feel like I should speak about, but I'm extremely uncomfortable. And listening to that, I work with a lot of clients, and this last year has been so hard when they have had to make those tough choices about standing up for something in particular moments and getting a lot of pressure, right? Like, oh, you need to go say something right now because we identify you with this cause and therefore you should use your voice. But it didn't feel right for them. So would they do that? Should they do that? And then if they did do that, that wasn't going to be authentic and it wouldn't feel comfortable. And then now they're in a crisis because they're now an expert speaking on a topic that they don't really care about. So let's say you've done it and you've blundered and you put something out there and you're now in this moment of saying, oh gosh, I've offended. What do I do now? And what I would recommend first and foremost is to pause and stop, listen, and sleep. And there's so many quotes out there about how if you react right away, you are likely not going to like what you put out there. Sleep on it, wake up the next morning with a clear mind, and then decide how you want to react. And I really like to give advice around talking to your trusted board of advisors. So these are the people that you have put around you who are on top of your reputation, meaning they're the ones out there advocating for you. So in a way, they're invested. So they've advocated for you. So if you've done something to your reputation, it affects their reputation as well. So they're going to give you some advice that they're invested in. Then you have the people who are those contrarians who are always going to give you that other opinion. Like you have an idea of something to go do, they're going to give you the other side of the story. And then you have those wisdom experts on your board of advisors who are always going to give you their wisdom because they've been there before. So stop, seek advice from them, and then really look into what are going to be the different scenarios that are going to fall out from your reaction. So you go in and you apologize. You say, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to say that. What's the fallout from that scenario? You over-explain. What's the fallout from that scenario? You do nothing. What's the fallout from that scenario? So you write down 1, 2, 3, here are the different scenarios. I'm going to play out how these are going to work for me, and then you make your decision. But the one that I see that people often go into, particularly I will say for the women that I work with, is the over-explanation. And that's where we really need to stop and say, okay, this is what I plan to respond with. I'm going to write it down. I'm going to rehearse it. I'm going to watch myself saying it, and then I'm going to put it out there. Now, if it's in writing, obviously, it's a totally different tactic, but practice saying it out loud and see how you feel with that response before you put it out to the world.
Thanks, Jenna. Having that really structured way to respond, but only after a good night's sleep is a great recommendation. Rocky, I know that you've had an incredible career. I imagine that crisis communications has been a part of that in some capacity. Is there anything that you can add to this conversation?
Sure. The two pieces of advice I'd offer up is that, crisis communications 101 is never find yourself in a crisis. And so I love Jenna's point around having a board of advisors. The reality is, even if it's not a hot topic, just an everyday topic that you're thinking of posting about, it's always helpful to have a board of advisor, to have an advocate of some sort that you can reach out to, an accountability partner, so that you have someone to bounce ideas off of, because oftentimes we're speaking to ourselves, everything sounds great. When you reach out to someone else, you get real-time feedback. They can help you tweak language. I will say I have some founder friends who reached out to me recently because February 1st is the beginning of Black History Month, and for their brands, they wanted to do various programs. And I thought it was great that they felt comfortable enough to reach out and ask those questions, because those things matter. Once they're out there in the universe, it's hard to take it back. The second piece that I would throw out, I hate to give a framework for how to respond, because I do think that it truly depends. The response depends on what happened. It depends on what you said. It depends on how you said it. It depends on the topic. It depends on the forum, the channel that you expressed it. It depends on how many people actually saw what you said, which is the reality of life. From a social media angle, as you're managing various social media sites, if 20 people saw it versus 1,000 people, there's a different perspective that you would take in terms of strategy. So I think there's a lot of, it depends. But I do think that you often find a framework that is considered is around delete, retreat, and apologize from a social media perspective. You do want to delete what you put out there. I know that might feel a bit inauthentic, but the reality is, if you're managing a brand or you're managing your own brand, if 20 people see it, it's offensive. Well, if 1,000 people see it, it will be more offensive. It can have greater implications in terms of what happens for you. So I do think deleting is helpful. I think retreating is also helpful for two reasons. I think one is you need to take a step back, and as Jenna alluded to, sleep on it. Think about what happened, because I do think there is an element where we have to do some self-discovery to understand how do we prevent ourselves from making those mistakes going forward. I think the other piece is retreat for your audience's sake. You may have offended people in your audience or fellowship. They need a break from you as well. And then I think there's the opportunity for you to apologize. And I think an apology can range from letting folks know that you're learning and growing, and you appreciate their coming along with you for the journey. But I think if it was something deeply offensive, I think it requires a different level of apology, acknowledging what you put out there was offensive and that you hurt others, and that is never your intention, and that you're going to be open to listen going forward. So I would state, rule number one for me is never find yourself in a crisis. But the reality is, if you do find yourself in a crisis and you need to do something right away, because oftentimes we feel the need to react, I will say, if you're putting something out there in the universe that's offensive, please take it down, take it away, and then we can think about what the strategy could be to address it.
Delete, retreat, apologize. We have it. Okay. Panel, we are officially out of crisis mode. We're back to proactive planning. You can breathe a sigh of relief here. Let's say you've determined these brand pillars, you're ready to show up in the world, but you're having a bit of a creative rut, a bit of writer's block maybe. What are some of the places that you should be looking for inspiration to really build authentic but inspired personal brand content? Renee, would love to hear from you on this one.
Yeah, well, first, it's important to recognize that it happens to everybody. So don't panic. It does happen. I think if you find yourself in a rut, it's often as a result of complacency. I think we tend to get good at what we do, and that will become true about how you establish your brand in social media, and then we plateau. And, it's a little bit like when you go to the gym and you train every day and you always do the same routine. At one point, you'll stop progressing. So what do you do then? Well, I think all the gym trainers would tell you have to change it up. And I think that if you're in a rut and if you need inspiration, you have to change it up. So I'll share a little bit what I've done over the years to help me. First, I think you have to show up, right? It can be very tempting to do something else if you're not feeling inspired. Browse the internet, watch the news, but the truth is that it'll only prolong the rut, the lack of inspiration. So instead, you have to keep showing up and you have to keep trying. The second thing I would advise is to shut down the distraction. I find I have to close the door. I have to put the phone down. I have to really disconnect and let the quiet sink in so I can hear my own thoughts. And in that, I often find inspiration. Another thing I like to do is to just change the scenery. So for me personally, going for a walk just works wonder. I'll go for a walk, no music, just my thoughts, or if there's music, it's just like background music, no words. I can really, again, listen to my thoughts. And then maybe one final advice I would give everyone is just don't overthinking. Sometimes we put a ton of pressure on ourselves because we want every single communication to be groundbreaking. And it's okay to set high standards for ourselves, but that's just too much pressure. You have to remember that if you picked a topic and a brand that you're passionate about, it's probably a topic that you know a lot about. So even what may seem like mundane comments to you may be super insightful for others. So just don't overthink it. Don't put too much pressure on yourself.
Thank you, Renee. I will be taking a walk after this panel. That was a very soothing answer. Rocky, I know that you are a master content creator. Anything that you can share here too?
Sure. Well, first, I will say I also love taking a walk. I also go for a run to find inspiration as well, just to get the negative toxins out. Always works for me. I would say I think, inspiration's all around us. I do think it's sometimes helpful to look to other people for inspiration, not because you want to copy what they do or mimic, but I do think you oftentimes realize you have ideas by looking into what they're posting. So I will say I sometimes find inspiration in looking to some influencers in various spaces that interest me. Here's what I will say about influencers. They are incentivized to create content that's engaging. And so they do tend to put more time into it and strategy, and they tend to push the envelope a bit and just can push those get those creative juices going through and maybe give you a bit of a push by seeing someone else put it out to the universe. I also think it's important to just look to folks that you can identify with. So folks in your industry, to see what they're posting. Choose 3 to 5 people, follow them across various platforms, see what they're posting, get some real-time feedback in terms of what's resonating with the audience, because you'll have a sense for how others are responding. You also can have a sense for how you can differentiate. How can you position yourself? If most people are posting around this area, but there's an opportunity here, that could also get you going in terms of thinking about maybe there's a broad topic, but you can maybe be an expert in this space or have your voice differentiated in this space. I think it also helps you to realize the areas where you don't want to post. For some reason, you realize it doesn't really work well. Maybe the ideas seemed great, but it didn't really work well in terms of execution. It can help to validate that for you. And I will say, as a marketer, I tend to find inspiration by following brands. So I look to various brands in health and fitness and beauty, just brands that I love, and that brands that have community as well. So for a lot of these brands, especially consumer tech brands, building community is important. So I find inspiration by following them, following what they post. And I realize there are other ways in which I could potentially apply that to some content that I was thinking about, whether it's personal content or actually whether it's VC content for our firm. So those are some areas I'd recommend.
Fantastic. I also want to share one final super tactical thing that I've learned in Jenna Kutcher's Content Lab. Maybe some of you listen to her Goal Digger podcast. But she shared this recently. She's had pretty consistent brand pillars for several years that she's been building her blog, and she's always looking for new inspiration. She sometimes just types one of her brand pillars and the word "and" into a search engine, into Pinterest, to see what are other people searching for? How can I capitalize on the buzz right now? I thought that was a super tactical thing that I had never really done before in content creation, so wanted to share that. Okay. So we're inspired, we're developing this content, and now we have to figure out where are we going to put it. How should you decide which platforms are the best fit for your thought leadership or your personal brand expression? And Miracle, I'm hoping you can help us with this one. Is it absolutely necessary to get on TikTok and Clubhouse?
Good question. So it might feel super overwhelming right now because there's so many platforms. I mean, Clubhouse is now the big platform. But I would say in terms of deciding between this plethora of different places you can go is really seeing where your audience is and like where are they most active and like what types of, do they like to consume more video-based content or more like photos or Twitter, like text-based content. And so just like really digging in and doing like some research about your target customer. And then I would say with TikTok in particular, I think what makes TikTok really interesting is the virality that you can go viral pretty easily. But a lot of it is built on trends. So I would say if you want to go the TikTok route, just like really studying the trends, whether it's like the songs that are really popular right now. I don't know if you guys have probably heard like driver's license. That's a really popular sound that you can put in your videos and just really seeing what's out there. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I have been diving into Clubhouse every once in a while. I don't really know what's going on there yet. Seems like there's huge potential. It's just lost on me right now. Okay, so we're going to move to our owned and operated. No, we're moving away from owned and operated. We are going to go to press. So creating social media profiles or buying a domain name, those are activities where we would have our total control over our story. But I'd like to hear any guidance that you have on developing relationships with reporters or leveraging more traditional media to promote your personal brand. Jenna, can you chime in on this one?
Pass that one to someone else if you don't mind, but I do what you said, Miracle, and tell a quick story about these different platforms. I'll never forget when I was starting off on one of the platforms, I was told by a bunch of people that I needed to have an Instagram. I need to be on Instagram. And I felt so much pressure. I remember I was in Mexico when I was told that I need to be on Instagram. And I remember arranging rocks on the beach in a little like formation. And I wrote the word connect and took a picture. I was like, okay, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna take pictures every single day, and it's gonna be part of my personal brand, and it's gonna align to my mission around helping transform people into great communicators. And going back to what you said before, Renee, about the energy, I was so stressed about that because it was not my platform. I'm like, I shouldn't be here. This is not where my people are. This is not where my stakeholders are. So just recognize your energy level as you go into these different platforms and ask yourself, is this right for you? Is this connecting to your brand? Is this where thought leadership is going to happen for you? And then with regard to building relationships with reporters, I'm going to pass that off to someone else. Colleen.
Miracle, I know that you have done that as well. Is that something that you can speak to?
I would be happy to. So in terms of connecting with reporters, I feel like Twitter is actually a really great way to build your media list. So like creating a list for, say you're in the tech industry, you can build one of tech reporters, or the beauty industry, whatever industry that you're in, and follow them and try to get a feel for the type of content that they're writing and like their beat, so to speak, and types of things that might be of interest to them, and also help them out. Like you're building a relationship. So you might want to reshare their content or like their tweets. And also you might want to reach out to them after like taking some time to like build that relationship and comment, retweet, all of those things, and reach out, share your story, and really focus on how best your story aligns with their what they're writing about, and ultimately like their audience. And I think first of all, if you have like a more of a giving mentality of like, how can I help this person's audience learn more about this topic or learn more about this industry? I think that approach is what's going to help you build that connection with that reporter.
Miracle, that's such great advice. And it's something that I actually do in my day-to-day. We target specific reporters based on their reach, based on the topics that they're writing about. And whatever their most recent coverage is, we're considering who is our expert on that topic and how do we use this as a moment to reintroduce them, to get them back into the spotlight as an expert. So great advice there. We have just about 10 minutes left, and I do want to hop over to the Q&A panel here just to make sure we're getting all of our audience questions. The first upvoted question here is, can you give us an example of how we can use amplification in important meetings, calls, and networking? Amplification in important meetings, calls, and networking. Anyone want to jump in on this one? The way that I'm interpreting this is Like, let's say you need to do some micro promotion of your personal brand. You need to show up as an expert in an important meeting or in front of an individual you just met at the Women in Cloud Summit. What is the strategy you might be using to assert your personal brand in sort of that micro moment? Yeah, Jenna, can you chime in here?
Well, I didn't know how formal, if you wanted me to just raise my hand or how you. Yeah, so I will give a couple two pieces of advice. One is know what I'm calling your powerful narrative is about what you do and what you want, and have that clear, write it down, and practice it. Second is find out a couple people who will advocate for you. Know what your powerful narrative is, comfortable saying it, and will advocate for you in a meeting. So that powerful narrative is, here's who I am, here's the value that I bring, and here's what I'm looking for. And then making sure that person is going to use that in the meeting to get your voice heard. Now, another person, particularly for the women that I've worked with, the reason having another person in that meeting do that for you is a lot of the women that I work with they don't want to be the one who says, excuse me, I'm an expert and you really should hear me right now because I've got an opinion on this in a meeting. They feel super inauthentic doing that. But having somebody next to you who knows what you're an expert in, say, you know, actually, Colleen would really be the right person to ask this question of, because she has over 30 years experience working with venture capitalists. Colleen, why don't you say something right now? That's easy for me to do. And it makes her feel amazing. And then she's got her voice in the room. So find a couple people that will do that for you in these high stakes meetings and amplify and advocate for you in an authentic way so that you can speak up.
And anyone else, please feel free to come off mute while you're doing that.
I would love to.
Yeah, Rocky, go ahead.
I would certainly love to add to that. What I would say is, for many of us, we find ourselves in rooms where, unfortunately, we have to advocate for ourselves. So to build on Jenna's point, I do think you have to feel comfortable advocating for yourself. And I think oftentimes working and leaving corporate, I had that similar situation, and going to early stage startups and now sitting on the other side of life on the venture side. I think the reality is oftentimes we're occupying the only seat. And so the reality is, over time, you have to feel comfortable advocating for yourself. I think there are various ways in which you can do that. I do think that because we're all online these days, I have found it easier to insert myself to conversations, because what I'm sharing out externally is actually being tracked by various folks that know me. And so there doesn't feel as much friction, if you will, in terms of being a part of the conversation, because they have that voice happening all the time. So the team knows that I'm talking about personal branding. So there's an opportunity that comes up. Well, Rocky would probably be a great person to talk about that, because we saw this amplified across various channels. So to me, that's how your personal brand helps to speak on your behalf when you're not inside the room, both offline and online. I would certainly love and appreciate if we always had someone in the room to speak on our behalf. I will say it is certainly most helpful, but I do think over time, the reality is we'll have to find ways and strategies in which we can speak up on our own behalf, whether it's shooting an email after me to say, thinking about this, would certainly love to take this on. I think there are different ways in which we can do it that maybe doesn't have to happen right on spot in the meeting, but it can happen through either post communications or through someone else who may have been in the room, where you can pull them aside and maybe they can advocate on your behalf.
Fantastic. Thanks, Rocky. I know that virtual digital engagement makes this a little bit more difficult, but the concept of an elevator pitch is pretty common, like having what you're going to say once someone asks you, what do you do? What are you working on? And I got pretty strategic about this in a previous role, because I would always see a really important manager walking around my building. And, you know, oftentimes when executives don't quite know what to say to you, they say, so what are you working on these days? And instead of just reciting, here's what I do in my job, I decided I was going to have like a powerful business metric that I was going to, you know, put in his face in that one moment that I got. And I shared the business metric. He was like a little floored, like no one ever responds to me that way. They just say like, oh, things are going well. And then he said, we should get some time together, like book some time on my calendar. I'd love to hear more about that. So, you know, first reading this question, I didn't quite know how to interpret it, but there are so many of these micro moments when you can instill your personal brand and have a big takeaway for someone. I think we can probably get to one more question. This is also the most popular question. So, how do you build a thought leadership presence in a space you previously haven't occupied? We're talking about that pivot. I've been one thing for a long time. How do I get to a new thought leadership space?
Well, I would kick off by saying I think there's an opportunity to co-author with folks. So if you're partnering with someone who has a base and who has credibility in this space, I do think if you are part of a conversation, a part of an article, I think that helps to put you on the radar. And then going forward, you could potentially dive off, go off and be able to speak to reporters or continue that conversation across your channels. So I do think it's helpful if you have a group that you can work with, or you have an individual that you can work with who already has built a base in that space.
I love that, Rocky. Pivoting, leveraging their authenticity to make your own authentic foray into this new space. Okay. And unless anyone has any more thoughts on that topic, we can go to this next one. How do you work out the balance between your professional self and your authentic self in the workplace? And Renee, you had some great thoughts on authenticity, so I would love to hear from you on this one. The balance between your professional self and your authentic self.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the key to success is when these two things blend into one. I don't see these two things as independent, one of the other. I have to be authentic in my professional workplace, in my personal brand, which I project on social media, and I carry this through my personal life. So for me, it's really one of the same, and it's really about being comfortable in your own skin, recognizing that you have strengths, you have weaknesses, you're going to have some amazing success, you're going to make some mistakes, and you're going to learn. And if you're authentic through this, if you're sharing in an authentic way, then I think you're actually achieving a balance between the two. I very much see them as one of the same. I think you're on mute, Colleen.
I think you're on mute.
I absolutely am. Renee, thank you. What a great note to end on, that integration, that authenticity. To close out, I just want to say thank you to all of you panelists. This has been such a great conversation. I've learned so much looking at the chat window. People really appreciate everything that you do. So let's do a virtual round of applause. And thank you so much.
Thank you.